go down the line and tell me a bit about who you are, your fund, your interests in health technologies, and make it brief. So we can get to the real meat of it.
I got it.
Because they're going to Google you anyway.
Rebecca Lynn, I'm the founder, or co-founder and managing partner at Canvas Ventures. We're a $300 million fund. We focus on a number of areas, healthcare being one of them, and we've done deals including Practice Fusion, Doximity, Health Loop, and most recently Vita Health.
Great. My name is Rebecca Woodcock. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups. We run an accelerator program where I run the digital health track as a subset to the accelerator, and that means we curate about 8 to 10 health-related startups, mentor them, teach them growth, and help them with mentorships. So that's what I do.
My name is Mike Dixon. I'm at Sequoia Capital. We invest in companies all the way from startup stage all the way through very late stage financing. And healthcare is one of the largest areas where we spend time alongside consumer internet and enterprise technology. And within healthcare, it's very, very broad for us. So everything from providers to payers all the way down to health tech and diagnostics.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Schulte from McKesson Ventures. And we're the corporate venture arm of McKesson. McKesson's probably the largest healthcare business that nobody's ever heard of. They're actually Fortune 5. And the primary business of McKesson is drug distribution and selling technology and services to pharma, pharmacy, providers, and payers. And our venture fund's a $250 million venture fund, and we focus on services and information technology.
Fantastic. Okay, so something that people have definitely heard about, especially in this crowd, is the repeal of the Healthcare Act of Obamacare that was supposed to have happened today but was just delayed. And so the founders and entrepreneurs out here, I mean, the entire raison d'etre for a lot of them is to figure out what areas of our society, of our markets are actually being disrupted and what opportunities those create. So the potential repeal and replacement of Obamacare, how has that changed any of your appetites? How can companies actually play that dynamic, if at all? Has it changed the way you're looking at companies or what companies you're looking at?
I think the biggest issue, we just had a large roundtable event last week calling Trumping the ACA, which a few people here in the audience were at. And it was really interesting. It was a very interesting brainstorming session with payers and providers and startups and investors. I think the biggest issue is just uncertainty. And in the light of uncertainty, people just freeze. And so the problem we've seen overall is just that, is the unknown. And so hospitals and providers are kind of holding back, and payers, as they figure out what's going to happen if they can figure that out. And investors are probably holding back the most. I just had a call today with somebody saying, hey, we just don't know really what's going to happen. And so there's some obvious things that may change. There's the Planned Parenthood and safety net organizations like that will be severely impacted. I think for self-insured employers, for employers providing benefits, that really isn't going to move at all. It's really more in the individual market that we'll see some changes. And so I think for me, it's the uncertainty issue is really what's causing the most chaos and turmoil right now.
For me, it hasn't changed a whole lot of how we think about startups and the disruptions that they're creating. Prior to these conversations, I think hospitals in general, we've started to take a step back, those who are selling into hospitals because of pilot fatigue and whatnot. And, I don't know how real that is, but we've sort of been a little bit more critical about the companies selling to that market. And so, however the reimbursements or how hospitals get funded changes under the regulation, I think, we've already sort of taken a step back there, but there's so many other megatrends that are not changing. There's too many. Healthcare is just so broken. It's been broken for a long time. There's things that need to be fixed from an infrastructure level. There's workflows. There are people who are still getting sick. So there's just so much opportunity, and wherever there's chaos, entrepreneurs can find opportunity.
Let me just, thank you for that, Rebecca. Well, let me just make the question a little bit more pointed for the rest of you who want to answer. Uncertainty, granted, creates chaos. A lot of investors will roll back, but for the founders out there, uncertainty is actually an amazing thing because it means that there are market discontinuities. And you want to try to figure out how to capitalize them. All of us on this stage actually take defined perspectives in each of our investments. We believe that things will zig when others believe that they will zag. We take that perspective, we actually make a bet on it, and we put our money where our mouths are. So are you guys, is anyone on this stage actually taking a perspective of how 1/5 of our GDP, all of healthcare, is going to land out? And are you putting bets based on that perspective? Surely you're not just sitting back and saying, I have no idea what's going on, so therefore, you know, I'm staying out. Are any of you actually taking defined perspectives and putting your chips on the table?
I wouldn't say that we're doing anything new based upon what we think is going to happen with Trump. In some ways, I think that would be insane.
I think I'm moving to New Zealand.
And so, I mean, we just don't know. And like, healthcare is the one area where, you know, if you go back to high tech, you could ride that wave and it works. Like, other markets that we invest in don't have the regulatory headwinds or tailwinds that healthcare has, and you really don't want to be on the other side of that, and you can wait because they take a while to sort of play out. So there's nothing that's different for us. I'd say the last time it really mattered to us was when we made an investment in a company called Clover Health, where we had to make a determination, albeit it's not genius level determination, that Medicare Advantage would exist going forward, okay? So like, that was a much harder determination to make in 2008 because President Obama was talking about eliminating Medicare Advantage. But nobody's talking about that today. In fact, some people are talking about making that 100% of Medicare, basically by privatizing. So I don't think there's anything to be done right now today. In fact, I think the big worry is basically what Rebecca, this is easy for me to say, outlined earlier on, which is basically like, it's an excuse for providers not to spend any money. So you want to make sure you have customers that have money. Payers will pay for stuff. Pharma companies, they still got their thing going on, but like, they've used to work at a provider. They're looking for excuses.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, look, on the margins, maybe if you're in a diversified fund, maybe healthcare relative to tech or some other places you could put money to work, you know, maybe you're changing. We don't have a choice. All we invest in is healthcare, and so we're going to keep investing in healthcare. And to Rebecca's point, I do think the underlying trends in healthcare support great entrepreneurs and great ideas and innovation. I do think we are looking more closely at who the end consumer is or who the stakeholder is. And in our case, Mike just mentioned pharma. I mean, we really like things that are developed with pharma in mind or pharmacy. And those two end customers, we think really are not likely to be impacted. I mean, there is some talk about drug importation and drug prices, but how entrepreneurs get paid is unlikely to change for people selling into pharma and pharmacy in particular.
Can the drug importation get over the wall, or
tunnel?
By boat.
Drones.
Drones. Now you're talking. Now you're talking.
Drone shipment of pharmaceuticals.
So you know,
from
drones is one of those buzzwords which, when you mention it, just like AI, at least in the tech space, a lot of investors' ears perk up and they say, "Oh, you're doing something with drones or AI or machine learning?" Well, let me in. What sectors do you guys think are the most interesting for your funds at this moment in time? And are there ways for these founders and entrepreneurs to position their companies, you know, obviously in a kind of window dressing type of way, to fall under a more attractive or less attractive rubric? The same company might be described as a wearables company, or as a digital health company, or as a healthcare IT company. When you hear those kind of subsectors, do some of them give you the weebie-jeebies, or do some of them give you get you really excited? What are the kind of the things that you're really jazzed about and not jazzed about today?
They can go first.
They can go first, guys.
Well, I'll pick up on some of the themes from the last panel. Everybody was talking about AI and machine learning. It's easy for me to be a critic when I don't actually understand what those things mean, but I do notice in just about half of the pitches that we sit in on, those are required terms in a presentation. And I think I'm skeptical that in the near term, AI and machine learning are going to transform how we do healthcare. I think, again, in the long term, those will probably fit nicely into specific use cases that lend themselves to rules or inclusion, exclusion, where you can automate decisions. But I think where we are today in the healthcare industry, I think you have to think more about a service layer on top of software and automation. And so I think a lot of the pitches that we see when people just start using the word AI and they forget that there's sort of an interface between all of the service layer in healthcare, to me, the hype is a little bit ahead of where we actually are today.
Yeah, because I'm part of they, I think. I'd sort of take the other side of that one. We believe it's going to happen, so it's a question of when. So we're paying a lot of attention to that. But
we believe what's going to happen.
AI and machine learning will find their way into healthcare and change the way medicine is practiced. Yes. Excuse me. However, that isn't the thing that we pay the most, because we believe that. But the thing that we pay the most attention to is how you're going to get into the workflow of how the people deliver care, right? So I would say that we're paying a lot of attention to that. Buzzwords in general, I am not a fan of at all. So sort of all the ones you listed almost makes me want to turn off more than turn on. My latest one is population health. Hate it. Now, I think there's a lot of companies that play into that tailwind, but like that to me is like you telling me providers are taking on risk, I get it, but you don't solve all the world's problems with that solution, and so to me it's somebody that has found something that's delivering real ROI and people are using it. That's what gets me excited, not some term.
I just get excited about businesses that have traction and have repeatable, predictable incomes. And so if they're showing that, even if it's in a market where I thought I would hate, I suddenly become interested.
But Rebecca, you of everyone on this stage operates probably at the very earliest stages where traction, repeatable outcomes don't exist. Because most of the companies that you evaluate, I would imagine, have not done it once, never mind repeated. So does that mean you're just not investing in this area at all? If that's your demand?
Actually, no. Part of our criteria, and it's true, sometimes we do go a little bit earlier where it's pre-launch, but in those cases, there has to be a compelling reason, like a very clear customer, a very clear business model, and the strength of the team and their backgrounds and their ability to pull it off, or our belief. We'll take chances like that. But actually, most of the companies that come to us will have a product already built in the hands of somebody, and it depends on if it's a enterprise sale. It could be one or two. If it's being paid for, then it's commercialized, right? They found some sort of customer, a buyer. We're willing to take that risk, and now our job is to help them figure out how to grow that.
Okay, good. Here's a question that I often get asked, and I'm going to pose it to all of you. At whatever stage you invest, entrepreneurs and founders always want to know, Rebecca, what does it mean for me to have traction? Do you want dozens of users? Do you want a pilot with McKesson, or do they have to have deployed beyond the pilot to a full deployment? Do you want hundreds of thousands of dollars, $1 million of an AR? Like, what are the, I know, and this will vary by sector, but what are kind of some of the thresholds, the bars that these entrepreneurs and founders have got to clear in order to say, okay, yeah, it's now interesting to 500 startups?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question to answer because it depends on who the customer is, how competitive the market is. I would say if it's a competitive market, we're going to look for more traction. If you don't have traction, it's all about the ability to execute that. And but if it's not a competitive market, if there's no clear winner, and it's an enterprise sale, 1 or 2 customers, I would say that pilots are not as valuable as they used to be. Commercialization, somebody actually buying a product and having a contract, unless there are some pilots that will convert under very specific milestones, and they do that. So there are some general guidelines, but it does depend on each company and their situation.
How about the rest of you? We often, the way we pass to a lot of founders, we often say, oh, you don't have enough traction yet. And that all-encompassing, horrible word is so ill-defined for most of us. But what does traction mean to you? Anyone?
So we place a lot of emphasis on just customer calls. And so we want to be able to speak to the people using the product. And for us, a pilot is not a customer. So, we don't have any hard and fast rules, but five paying customers that we can validate, that the product is working or the offering is working as described, and that it's going to be renewed in terms of a contract, and there might be contract expansion opportunities within that customer, and those are the kinds of things that we're interested in understanding.
Yeah, and the whole death by pilot thing, I mean, it's really scary, right? The faster you can get to a contract paying you on an annual basis or a 3-year basis is much better, because we've seen so many companies that come in and they have logos just plastered all over their slide, and they're all pilots and they don't count. Right? And so they only count when they actually convert from pilot into actually doing something real. And I just wanted to add from the last question, all these buzzwords that are out there. I've been investing in healthcare IT for 9 years. I've gotten incredibly cynical. I think 80% of the cost, the answer is lose 50 to 100 pounds, right? and honestly, like if we were in any other audience, I'm from the Midwest, I was sort of doing a head count, the weight in this room would be at 10,000 pounds more, right? and seriously, I mean, when you look at, there's all this talk about genomics and AI and machine learning, those things are all at the margin, right? If you want to impact 80% of this healthcare cost, you get people to lose 50 to 100 pounds, and in some cases more, because that goes into sleep apnea, hypertension, diabetes, depression, all the psych meds that you see out there, right? Not to mention hip and joint replacement, the whole shooting match, right? So if you really want, to impact healthcare and cost, you have to actually make obesity be the same social impact as smoking. Where when I was growing up, smoking, it was not cool. I couldn't tell somebody not to smoke in my house, right? It was just not something you would do. In fact, you made it okay for people. You found the ashtray, right? You have to make obesity that same type of issue in order to actually impact what our healthcare costs are. And I don't know if the nation is politically kind of ready to do that and to get people health. And so our latest investment was Vator Health. And the reason I liked Vator so much is they had real solid metrics, traction. They had paying customers for three-year time periods of like eBay and FICO and others. And they took behavioral health beyond just diabetes or just mental health. They were an overall platform because everything is comorbid, right? If you have one issue, you have 6. And that's how they were attacking the marketplace. And they had real numbers showing that they reduced hypertension, that they reduced weight, they increased weight loss. And so I think, as my cynicism has increased over the years, you'll see the investment kind of pattern increase. Like my first investment was Practice Fusion. It was all about the data, right? And I kind of scratched my head. I'm like, okay, as you go forward, I finally realized it's lose 50 to 100 pounds. And how do we get people to actually do that?
Very good. I read a paper once that kind of tried to assign and attribute positive health outcomes since the prehistoric ages, and everything up to basically the 19th century. 90% of all positive health outcomes were attributable to simple hygiene, clean water and just the hygiene. And then everything else since basically the 1900s has been 4 things: diet, exercise, sleep, and stress. And if you have those 4 things taken care of, then it vacates almost every health problem out there.
Well, and sleep, if you're overweight, you probably have sleep apnea. Like 10 pounds can cause sleep apnea, right? And so then you're not sleeping. Well, then if you're not sleeping, you're depressed, right? It's just like bam, 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 bam. It just rolls down the hill, right? And so I think we have to get real about what people should weigh and try to really create change in that direction.
Okay, so you're going to answer this question last because you're the one who hates buzzwords, but in the interest of these guys, and just to force you to answer the question about the title of the panel, I think it's like what parts of health tech are hot and overhyped. Let's go down the line and tell us what's hot and what's overhyped. So however you want to phrase it, just give us a 1 to 2 word answer of what sector or area is hot and what you think is overhyped.
Can they be the same thing?
No, almost by definition not. Hot, let's say hot and accurately priced versus overhyped. Okay, so who wants to begin? Sorry, Dave.
I'll give a slight.
Go ahead.
I'm going to answer the question I want to answer. I would say
Dan Conway.
Medication adherence, I could give that answer for both of those categories. I would say it's been overhyped in the sense that the outcomes to date have not lived up to the expectations in general, but I would say I don't think anybody is underestimating the opportunity, commercial, clinically, otherwise, if we can find a way to make people more compliant with their medications. And so I think it's a problem worth solving. I hope more entrepreneurs try and work on this problem, but I think the efforts to date have been overhyped in terms of their efficacy.
So both hot and overhyped is medical regimen compliance.
Medication adherence, trying to get people to take pills when they should take them and be compliant with a medication regimen.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'll give my answer. Personalized medicine.
Is the hot or overhyped?
It's the hot.
Okay.
Because pharma companies are going to be able to target 5% of the population or 2% of the population or 1% of the population and still be able to make money.
Right.
That's happening. And we have the data about that part of the population. So I think that's a good thing. My overhyped is what I said earlier, it's population health. Maybe it's because we're investors in a great analytics business, and I'm tired of everybody saying they sell analytics. And so population health, also because I'm not sure most of the providers in the country are going to ever be able to manage risk.
I don't know if this is really hot, but I hope it becomes hot pretty soon. I just have a passion for that intersection of health and finances, not only because of my background, but I think it's a major problem and an underserved part of the healthcare system. So I'd like to see more companies tackling different pieces of that. And I agree, just the analytics piece. I think we'll get there, but we're so far from it, and I can't wait for the day, but the data's dirty. Nobody's really doing it.
And you should just lose 50 pounds.
Okay, so Rebecca L, hot is weight loss, and
yeah, hot is getting people to lose 50 pounds. And I also like marketplace transparency. Your socks are pretty hot too, Patrick. Those
you're so nice, thank you.
But and overhyped are all these insurance startups that are trying to really go out there and acquire, the hardest to acquire section of the entire population and the hardest section of the entire population to actually help, right? I think that's completely overhyped, and most of those are bleeding cash. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, cool. In the remaining time, and if you guys have questions, we can answer those too if the organizer will allow us. But let's get really practical. A lot of these healthcare companies have very different capital needs than the next Snapchat or Facebook, because in many cases they are producing hardware. In many cases they have higher regulatory burdens, and the way that translates.
Seen how much cash Snap?
Sorry?
I'm just.
What?
They've raised a lot of cash. So.
Yeah, no, but my question is because a lot of these healthcare startups are more cash consumptive, yes. They have different financing needs. Okay. And so instead of just raising, you could, if I were to make another iPhone app for 13-year-old, consumers, I can get by with, $250,000 to start. But a lot of these companies are going to have to consume greater amounts than that for regulatory and hardware concerns. So what is your advice for how to sequence the raise of that? Would you like to see companies raise a relatively small amount first, kind of prove something out, but what, and then do the bigger cash burn? Or are you bold enough to say, if I believe in this company, you should raise the $4 to $5 million right off the bat, get that piece of hardware out there, or get past FDA or get past the first phases of FDA so that we can see that that's the real first meaningful milestone. Is there any difference between how you guys invest in healthcare companies versus the way most of us invest in tech companies, which is relatively capital efficient?
So when I was at Kaiser, we did a fair amount of medical device investing, and so you would gate the size of the round to milestones like FDA approvals. I think in services and IT, it's a little bit different. You don't have the definitive moment where there's clear value creation, and so I'll give an unsatisfying answer to this. I think it sort of depends on what you need to prove to demonstrate that you've got a repeatable business with unit economics that customers are willing to pay, and there's different steps along that curve. But part of it's also just market-driven. Investor enthusiasm and the competitive landscape. How many other companies are there that are trying to solve the same problem, and do you need a war chest or not? But as an investor, I'd rather not invest more money than is needed to get to that next step to show value or demonstrate value.
For us, I would say that we don't change our behavior because it's a healthcare company. And as a result, that means we don't invest in some kinds of healthcare companies, usually. Mm-hmm. Hardware is hard, medical device is hard for us. For some of those reasons, you've got to play a lot of cards to find out if you've got something, and that's a hard business model for some people, not for everybody, but it is for us. So we don't change our own behavior because it's a healthcare company. I would say the one area where they tend to be perhaps a little more capital efficient early than a lot of businesses is diagnostics. But with a fairly small amount of capital in diagnostics, you can find out if things are working, even with a small hardware device, if that's part of the package. And so I don't think that any of the rules of gravity change, at least for us.
Well, Michael, do the rules of gravity, do you kind of do different gravitational constants apply to different sectors? You are part of a firm, like many of us, that have invested in other types of hardware companies, some of the most famous semiconductor companies in the 1970s and 80s, for instance. Financial services, which are highly regulated, have to go through SEC, all that stuff. And so those are, when you look at those company dynamics, they are, you can make an argument that they're relatively similar to the way many of these healthcare companies need to be funded. And you've done those companies. So is it just a matter of healthcare is somehow different? Or is it that we don't know enough, or as investors, we collectively may not know enough about healthcare right now, or certainly digital health. So how do you distinguish between investors' willingness to do other types of non-tech care, healthcare tech companies, hardware companies, and other regulated industries? Education, for instance, another big one.
Yeah, well, one thing is we haven't done a whole lot of semi-investments in the last 10 or 15 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that it's really different, but the bottom line is healthcare is really hard. It's way harder than a lot of other things. There are things that are worse. It's a shorter list than the things that are better. Now, there's good news. Once you're in, it's a lot stickier, right? There's a lot of reasons. It's a huge market. It's bigger than every other market, and so on. But for me, there's a lot of latency. You can build a great product and nobody cares. You build a great diagnostic, payers don't pay. You build a great piece of software that doctors don't want to buy it. You sell it to them for $1, they want to know why it's not $0. That's the market we're in. I think that's different than financial services, than anything that touches consumers, selling to an IT buyer at Fortune 500 company XYZ is way easier than selling to an HR buyer, unless it's Comcast, because they're pretty inventive, right? So I'd say in just about everything, it's pretty hard, mm-hmm. And that's reality.
It's tough for us to come in on hardware in general, just because we're so early stage. We don't invest huge amounts of money, but to the extent that a prototype and a product can be brought to market without huge amounts, at least initially, if there's an angle to go maybe direct to consumer, sometimes we may do that deal. We did one last batch called Siren Care, who's doing rather well. We actually took them pre-launch and helped them launch. And this was one of these bets that we made because the team was very strong. They had a prototype that was working, and it was just a clear need that they were addressing. They also had a really big long-term vision. You know, it's really redefining the wearable itself. But the way they brought to market was very grounded. And so I think we made some exceptions, and we will make exceptions in cases like that.
Alrighty, audience questions? Anything? Otherwise, I'll ask another one. No. Oh, you have a question. Great, terrific.
There you go.
Who are you?
So good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. My mom has been needed to lose 50 to 100 pounds for about 60 years now. So my question is, why isn't the healthcare system addressing that? Number one. Number two, what kinds of solutions might you think might work in that space? And my last question, and hopefully this is helpful for everybody else as well, how do we meet you guys to pitch our companies to you?
Yeah, so first of all, if you go to a doctor, most doctors have never even taken a nutrition class, right? So they don't even bother. My mom's doctor told her that the soda she was drinking every day had nothing to do with her high blood pressure. And so now I have no argument, right? So it's challenging, right? They actually don't believe it's worthwhile even, because they're a very cynical view of the patient is the patient just won't change anyway, right? So Vita Health actually does have a consumer offering. It has been shown to work. That founder had a very similar issue that you did with your parent, and that's why she pursued Vita. And so it is coaching. It's behavioral change, and it's behavioral coaching, and that is what is proven to work. And a lot of people don't realize that, I have a sister who's incredibly bright, much smarter than I am, and I was home a while back, and I saw her pull a Coke can out of the fridge, and it was like 11 o'clock. I'm like, oh my God, you're gonna drink that before lunch? She's like, I've only had 3 today. And she was serious as a heart attack. And people just don't realize it. And then when you go back into the Midwest, where I'm from, you would think that the choices of fruits and vegetables and things like that would be strong, right? When I'm from a small town. And I go in the grocery store, and it was really pathetic. I mean, the fruits and veggies were just something you just really wouldn't want to eat, right? And so I think there was a challenge, too, in food distribution as well, and just teaching people what is healthy and what isn't healthy and what is normal. And what portion sizes are normal, right? I mean, I went back to a restaurant, I think it was like Applebee's or Chili, I don't know. Every vegetable on the menu they had made unhealthy. And I didn't think it was possible. Every freaking vegetable. And my sister's like, oh yeah, there's veggies. Let's get the baked beans covered in cheese, or whatever it might be. But they had managed to make every single vegetable completely not healthy. And so I think it's going to create a lot of work, but it is behavioral change, and it's education at a very young level. And it's, trying to encourage the doctors to actually take a nutrition class.
I would add to that, everything I agree with. The other thing is, traditionally, prevention has been hard to monetize. Like, there hasn't been
doctors don't believe in prevention, for the most part.
Well, yeah, and that's part of it. That's part of it, because they can't make money off of it, and they haven't been taught to run their business that way. That's changing little by little, and I think there's more evidence around that, but you're right, it's such an education issue.
That's actually why we invested in a Medicare Advantage plan. So to answer the question specifically, one of the problems we have is, even if you have commercial insurance, the average lifetime in a commercial insurance plan is like 18 months, right? Because people either leave their job or they change plans within their employer. And so it's really like losing 50 pounds is absolutely the problem, and it absolutely takes a long time. And so actually nobody's incentivized to invest in something that has long-term ROI. And so one of the reasons why we thought we'd go to, and insurance is hard, but going all the way to that point was because if we do our job right, we can keep those people for 20 years. And we can invest in long-term ROI positive things. And that's one of the only insurance markets that you can actually do that. So I think the problem is the incentive structure, by and large, along with, I don't know what the average age of a physician is in the United States. It's probably north of 50. To answer your other question, and I don't know where you went, you can email me.
Can I just
so we're on, like, at least for us, just email us. There's 4 or 5 of us that do healthcare a lot.
Can I say one point of optimism? Sean Duffy was on the panel previously. their data shows that they have higher persistence rates among elderly than they do younger generations. So I think there is beginning to emerge some data that we shouldn't assume that elderly people will not, or retirees will not adopt smartphones and use web-based interfaces. Their data actually shows that their program works even better among retirees than it does people of other age groups. So I think that's encouraging.
Okay, last word to our weight loss guru, Rebecca Lynn. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, if you look at yourselves and you want to know what to do in the audience, my suggestion would be get involved at the school level. I have a picture of my 3rd grade class growing up, and the kids are a bunch of sticks. I have a picture of my mom's current 3rd grade class, and she's a teacher, and there's not a single skinny kid in the class. And so, you know, if you're wanting to say, hey, what can I do to get involved, go to the school, get every vending machine ripped out of the school, get water and like healthy things put in, and really push them to look at what their school lunch program looks like.
And on that inspiring note, thank you very much, panel, and thank you, audience.